Hey, good evening, everybody. It's about 8:35 on the 30th day of June in 2020, 8:35 Mountain Time, which I think for most of us is where we're at. Norma is in Mountain Standard Time. The rest of us are in Mountain Daylight Time. And welcome to you all. Today's film was Incitement, and I'm going to mention, let me get this up, and then I will share it with you on the screen. I'm going to mention our July schedule. I always like to say these things are always subject to change, but I'll review it and presumably it will stay the same. Summer dates. July schedule PDF. Okay, so hopefully you should all see, some of you on the right-hand side and the schedule on the main part of the screen. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so next week we're going to see Sufat Hol, Sandstorm, which is a film in Arabic, shot among Bedouin in near Beersheba in Israel. We're going to go classic for The House on Shalush Street. This is set in the area between Jaffa and Tel Aviv and features a family. I call it Sephardic, they're from Alexandria. And in fact, some of the dialogue I know is in Ladino, other dialogue is in French and other languages. The Egyptian Jews were multilingual in those days. And the director was Moshe Mizrahi. It was Globus Golan. It's from about the same year as the film Casablanca. And there are other things to say about it. Some of the people in my class, like Mimi, like Kindergarten Teacher, when I saw it was on Canopy, I said, this is very much unlike all the other films that we're showing. It is a lot more about, I said, culture, poetry, family, and more. And it's really about the Kindergarten Teacher. One of the reasons I was thinking about it, though, is that with the Black Lives Matter, one of the lead characters, one of the important supporting characters, is an Ethiopian singing star in Israel. So I figured, we should do that. And she has a music video in part of it. And we'll do Fauda for our last session. How's that sound to everybody? And again, subject to change. If you say, well, let's do this or that, maybe it will change. I know people talk to me about Waltz with Bashir. I've seen it and talked about it too much. When I realized I had miscounted, and I think there are four Tuesdays in July, and we voted for 5 films. So that's my fault. I said, let's, Waltz with Bashir was the last one. So there it is.
Dr. Ward, this sounds so diverse, and I love that. And so it's really awesome.
Well, it is awesome. You, Norma, will probably find Kindergarten Teacher both exhilarating and very problematic. So I hope you watch it and forgive me.
Okay.
Okay. So let's get started. What did you think about Incitement? I have to say, one thing interesting about this crowd, my guess is that there are a lot of people who are with us tonight for whom nothing that I could say would be a spoiler.
Hopefully not.
Well, it's not going to be true for everybody. I teach in Wyoming. I have lots of undergraduates for whom they don't know how the story ends. They didn't know everything.
Oh, you didn't mean how the movie ends. You mean how the story ends?
Well, how the movie ends, particularly, is a choice of the filmmaker. But, I don't really want to say that, in my humble opinion, it's sort of predictable. I mean, what are you going to do? The question is, does it go to black or does it go to white? And people who are more involved in filmmaking than I am You know, art is in Los Angeles. I'm sure that there are thousands of your neighbors who are
Yes.
involved in the film industry who will talk about whether blackout or whiteout is the best after that kind of a scene. But you know, other than that, you know the basic outlines of the story. And for the Israeli audience, anybody who is 30 years old or, well, maybe 35 years old or older, and most of the people who are younger than 35 years who followed the news because the trials went on for a while, and the sort of girlfriend, Margalit Harshefi, her
Mhm.
trial didn't take place until 2000, and then she was pardoned, and that also brought it in the news. And, you know, so I think many people know the basic outlines of the story. Hello, Jessica. Welcome.
Hello, hello.
Okay. So, who wants to get us started with any comments whatsoever?
Well,
Art.
yeah, I thought it was a good review of fundamentalism, which we're going through in the United States right now, and
Yeah.
so political tribalism, where you're absolutely on one side and the other side is absolutely wrong, and compromise is extremely difficult. One little problem I had. It was difficult to read the subtitles when it had a white background.
Yes, it was. They were yellow.
Yeah, yeah, but when it was a light background, I couldn't
No,
quite read it. So I
that's
missed
what I mean, because they were so yellow. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is true. I had to watch it twice.
I'm sorry, I had nothing to do with the subtitles.
But it filled me in with a lot that I didn't know about the assassination. I
Okay.
was proud of that, yeah.
So what did you not know that you now know that you were happy to know about?
Well, I didn't know about the background of the assassin,
Oh, okay.
nor that there was a movement within Israel that was so fundamentalist. You know, it's like the white power people here. I didn't realize they went that far in Israel.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I had messaged you before that I was so disappointed to find out about the ultra conservatism of, and there were many, it seemed like, ultra parties in Israel, because there were so many different groups that he was pulling together that had different rabbis. And it's usually the Arabs that we are told have so many tribes. And I see that Israel has as many tribes, and I don't see any hope. I see less hope now for a two-state solution.
Okay. This is not relevant to our discussion of the film, but it is relevant to tomorrow, which, among many other things, Lori and Jessica may know the real important thing that happens tomorrow, which is not, Lori is smiling because I'm teasing her. But tomorrow is Canada Day, and Lori has Canadian background. I think Jessica also is a Canadian citizen or has Canadian citizenship too. But tomorrow, hey there you are. Good for you. Tomorrow is the day in which Netanyahu is going to announce something about annexation.
Yeah.
I have a little, you know, how shall I say this? I get aggravated by using the slogan, a two-state solution, as the purpose and goal of whatever the process is, whatever you're going to call it, it is. You know, it will make a two-state solution impossible. That's the kind of thing where I say I think we should be very careful about that language, because I don't know that anybody wants a two-state solution as something that's essential rather than instrumental. Instrumental to achieving Israeli security, instrumental to achieving peace and prosperity for Arabs, instrumental to everything else. But I think one of the biggest problems with the so-called peace process is making the instrument into the essence. And that's, again, this is not really part of my discussion for tonight, but I think it's something you should keep in mind. You should keep in mind when you digest the news in the next couple of days.
Yeah.
And Netanyahu wants to have a secure Israel. If it means having a Palestinian Arab state, that might happen. But his goal is not, it's right to have two states. And the Palestinians, I don't think their goal is to have an Israeli state alongside Palestine. Again, if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. I'm going to go back to something else, Claudia, that you mentioned. I told you to bring it up, and we should discuss the filmmaker's viewpoint about this issue. On the one hand, there were an awful lot of rabbis. Off the top of my head, and I did not list all of them that were in the film. I couldn't identify all of them, but there were references to Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, who died in the 1930s. There was references to his son, Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who's very, very important. Tzvi Yehuda Kook gave a lecture in 1967, actually before the Six-Day War broke out, in which he talked about the problem of not having all of the historic land of Israel. There was a fairly significant role given to, I believe it was an actor, because Benny alone died about 5 years ago, but an actor mostly playing the role of Benny alone. I think there may have been some real clips of him. Benny alone was among other things, the husband of Margalit Harsheffi's aunt, and he was he became later on a member of Knesset, and I think he was a minister of transportation or something like that. And he had his own peace plan, but the peace plan basically said, we'll annex all of the historic Palestine, and Arabs will not get citizenship, but they'll get Jordanian citizenship, and if they want to leave, we'll make it easy for them to move to Jordan because they'll have citizenship. Alon also got into a certain amount of trouble because he could have advised Yigal Amir not to assassinate Rabin. There was a shot of a rabbi from Brooklyn, Rabbi Abraham Hecht, who was mentioned. I found all of these people in Wikipedia very quickly just to double check. There was a passing reference to Rabbi Soloveitchik. Carol mentioned Soloveitchik died in 1993, but this is Soloveitchik the brother. This is Aaron Soloveitchik, not the Yeshiva University Soloveitchik. And Aaron Soloveitchik was quoted as being upset after Rabin was assassinated, that something he said might have been taken to encourage assassination. There was one other rabbi who, well, it doesn't really matter. That's quite a few rabbis.
And they did not go to jail.
None of the rabbis went to jail.
Right.
Right. Abraham Hecht and Menachem Elon and a few of the others lost their jobs. No, Beth, they were not indicted. But some of them lost their jobs and were out of Israeli politics for a while. In terms of the percentage, I read quite a few papers about this last night and today, and one of the things that Amir seems to have achieved by assassinating Rabin is that talk of killing an Israeli prime minister disappeared from the national religious camp. Another fascinating paper that I read talked about how Rabin's Oslo policy split the disciples of Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook. Some of them saw the state of Israel as being what was holy, and some saw the land of Israel as being what was holy. And Amir in the thing said, the land of Israel, the people of Israel, the state of Israel all together. And that these were the three prongs and the three, the three pillars of a stool. And if you miss one of them, then you lose. But it's actually quite interesting to see what, cannot remember his name, but this author was at Yeshiva University in 1995 as a student. And he said that when he found out that Rabin had been assassinated, he went back to his dorm, and a lot of his classmates were very excited until they realized, it took them a couple of days to realize that somebody had been murdered and that this was the Prime Minister of Israel. And this was not necessarily a good thing. But their initial reaction was very much supporting the politics of the assassin. And this is a very real issue. The number of people today who are probably in that mode, and I don't think Netanyahu is in a particularly high risk of being assassinated if he does the wrong thing by either the left or the right wing. But this is a risk of being a president or a prime minister or something like that. Josie, welcome. It's good to see you.
Hey, I'm sorry I'm late. Actually, I wanted to see the end of the film, so I could have watched it after this. I didn't think.
Were you surprised by the ending?
Pardon?
Were you surprised by the ending?
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
Okay. Vicki, you always look like you're about to say something wise. Do you have anything to add? Yes, Beth is right. I read about the rabbis whose names I remembered, and then there were a couple who were mentioned in the article on Wikipedia and in some of the academic articles that I read and the news accounts. Very, very, very problematic. And this, I have to say, this is one of the issues that I see with some of the modern Orthodox discussions. Very happy to discuss religious law, not necessarily happy to talk about whether or not it applies in the current day and whether or not we should be very careful. Two of my very good buddies were talking about how one could get away with murder according to Jewish law. According to biblical law, it's very easy to get away with murder. The trick, though, is that Jewish law also says, halacha also says, it's never right to kill anybody, no matter whom, and tasks I'll call it the secular state, the king, making sure that murders don't happen. So that you might get away with murder according to how the rabbis understood the Torah, because if you murder somebody, you get the death penalty, and the rabbis were not happy to give the death penalty. But the king could say, well, you get, prison for life and lose all your property. The king can do that. So anyway, this is one of the problems that I think the filmmaker showed in his discussion there. Anybody else have anything they want to talk about at this point?
Yes, Dr. Ward. Why or how did the young man who was in the IDF, how did he justify bringing that type of ammunition to his friend? How could he do that knowing that, that's questionable activity?
Anybody want to offer an answer? Donna, what do you think?
Well, I don't know how they got those. It was interesting that they did. The guy supported him. I suppose it could happen. Then, of course, it did. How somebody could find those particular weapons for him. We can find him here if we want to.
Yeah, Beth said he got indicted, right? I actually don't remember who got indicted for what. I read too much of this stuff, but there were a lot of people who got indicted, and several of them went to jail for aiding and abetting or for whatever. There was the brother, Haggai. There was the friend, Dror, something or other. And there was also a guy that in the film was described as possibly a spy for the Shabak.
Right, yeah.
And he also, that's consistent with what we know. And there are other people who got into trouble in various ways. Yes, Claudia.
So I was wondering who wrote, produced, and directed the film, and what was their point of view?
Well, that's our job.
Well, I want to know who it was who put the film together.
It was a filmmaker.
Mhm.
And I've been very busy today, so I'm just blanking on some of the details without my trot. I thought I would remember them, so I don't have notes. Incitement, but we'll get his name very soon. Yaron Zilberman.
Yeah, Silverman, I had that one.
Yeah, and I don't know much about his politics, although what's important. Let me share the screen. So here he is. He was born in Haifa in 1966. A late quartet, Watermarks. There'll be a full bio. That's all we have for the bio. That's in IMDb. And
Was he Orthodox?
oh no.
Mm.
But the real question we have to ask is, what do we think he was trying to do? Okay, Israeli-American director and champion women's swimmers of Koach Vienna. I remember this film. These are the women who swam in, and then were forced to flee Austria by the Nazis. And he lives in New York City, and he's a graduate of MIT. Okay, that's the best I can do in terms of Wikipedia. But now I'm asking you, what do you think Zilberman wanted to do? Art mentioned that this was particularly appropriate in our time when we are seeing all sorts of extremism emerge in our country. This film was produced in September of last year, of 2019.
Right, yeah.
It was the Ophir Award, and it was the Israeli nominee to get an Oscar. I don't think anybody would have expected the Oscars would have privileged it rather than anything else. But it was, the Israelis voted it best film. So it must have hit a nerve with Israelis. Why do you think it did? Yeah, Vicki.
Well, I don't know why it did with Israelis, but it did with me because I was looking at how easily influenced these people were, the ones
Yeah.
that were in each of the camps, so to speak. And especially his upbringing. I mean, from a psychology point of view, I thought it was so interesting how his mother just primed him for his role, as being the one that is going to, what was the word that she used?
Oh, the name that she given.
Which means he will redeem.
Redeeming, and
Yeah.
that he was the one that, and so he bought that. I mean, his father had a very interesting speech. I think at some point I'd like to talk about that or have somebody talk about it. But I thought his father's point of view was very interesting about, trying to talk some sense into him, saying that would be a terrible thing. I mean, you have no idea. It would take generations to recover from something like this. All the while not knowing that his son was actually going to be planning this and doing it. So I thought that the movie itself had a lot of tension because of that, because you knew that this kid was being primed, to do this, and his whole mental process was buying into his role, his purpose in life was to do this.
That's it. That's it. That's what I saw. I had two ribbons that went through there. I watched it twice because the first time I had to read everything. And the first one was that we just discussed it today in Chabad about the Moses and Aaron, and that there was a law that if you are to blame, then you get part of the team, then you get blamed for it, and that's why Moses and Aaron did not get to go into the promised land. So that was a theme that I saw going through that. And the second one was names, how the different names were used from Marguerite to all the people's names. It just had a meaning through it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that he took that, he owned it, and everything was measured in his purpose, to live that out. And so he never deviated from his belief. It never showed him, and only maybe there was one shot or two where it showed him hesitating a little bit, maybe, and being a little bit, gosh, should I be doing this?
No, and even trying to have a marriage thing, he couldn't, because even at sitting at that with girl, he was still talking about his vision and his dream, and everything just fed into that, which is one of Jewish things about following your journey.
Mm-hmm.
So, Donna, let me ask you, according to what you saw in the film, why did Nava leave Yigal?
I think it was socially, because her family and his family just didn't get together. And if you listen to it a little bit further, he was reading, "You should not be unequally yoked." He said a statement of that, and he saw that at her family and at his family, they saw the same thing, that neither one could really get together. And then when they sat together, he began to tell her where he was coming from in his heart, and she just couldn't do it, and he got mad at her people for not following what he wants to do. And so it was, to me, it looked like two groups of culture, of understanding each other's culture-wise, but that's me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Claudia, I saw you shaking your head, about to say something.
I wondered what his being Yemenite had to do with his point of view.
Okay. Art?
Yeah, that story with him and his lady friend, was that factual or was that added for dramatic effect? Did they want to?
Well, I can tell you what's factual. What's factual is that there was a lady named Nava Hurwitz or something like that, and that he had been going out with her, and that she broke off the engagement, and he was depressed for a while after that. I suspect that locating Nava in Psagot, which is right, and Psagot really is, it's like half a mile outside of Ramallah, except there's a wadi in between, which is what you saw in the film. I suspect that Nava's family really was from Psagot. I suspect that they did not check with Amir in prison, or with Nava, who got married to, in fact, a friend of Yigal Amir. They did not check with them to see how authentic the conversations were. But that I don't know. I think that's part of the fiction. I actually spent a tiny amount of time trying to see whether or not the actual Nava or the actual Margalit or the actual Yigal Amir even commented on the film's accuracy. I didn't find it. That is a testament to how much you can find and what I prioritize. It's not whether or not it's there. I can't imagine that they didn't have some sort of a comment sooner or later about whether they thought they were being portrayed accurately. But Amir did try to assassinate Rabin a couple of times. It seems that lots of people had heard him talk about it. Um, the girl, Margalit Harshefi, was convicted, but then she was pardoned. Um, and the president of Israel thought, and many other people thought, that there is no way that she could have realized how serious Amir was about the conspiracy. His brother, his friend, one or two other people knew that it was serious. And it seems that his plan to have some sort of a militia also was historic. And part of the reason he wanted to assassinate Rabin is because he couldn't get together enough people. And this is one of the answers to Claudia's question. He couldn't put together a large militia to do what he wanted. So, take out Rabin is the only thing that's left.
Yeah.
Well, Doctor, when you were talking about in your little presentation that we could read about your reports, your report was different than the movie, of course. It was just talking about factual things in his background, the Prime Minister's background. How did you see this film? Should I ask?
Yeah, well, I see the film, first of all, as very important.
Mhm.
And I think the film came at a time in which in Israel, people are worried about extremism. Quite frankly, the left wing, the right wing, the Arabs, the degree to which the fervently Orthodox part of the modern Orthodox movement, the Dati Leumi, who are the Kahanists and the followers of what used to be called Gush Emunim, where there's an awful lot of debate about what role they play in society. Hard right religious Zionists. Now, some of the religious Zionists are a lot more moderate, or at least their discourse is a lot more moderate. But, I think that's part of it. I think that the film clearly has the same kind of a notion behind it that I had when I gave that lecture, which Beth liked. Beth, thank you for your kind words about the lecture that I gave about Rabin. I had no idea that I would be doing the Incitement film, and this was for a film for the Jewish war veterans. I'm sorry, a talk for the Jewish war veterans that I presented. I actually think the film was very compelling. It is always the filmmaker's viewpoint. You always have to remember, whenever you see a film like this, this is not a this is not a newspaper writer trying to be completely neutral and just telling you the facts. This is a work of art, and the work of art tries to deal with issues. So, for example, I don't know whether the father of Yigal Amir made those speeches, but the filmmaker needs a speech by somebody to present different opinions. I don't know whether Yigal Amir had to go open up a Rambam. I have a tiny version of the same Rambam, and look for Hilchot Rotzeach and Hilchot Mosrim, the laws of the murder, where they have the Rodef, and the laws of the one who is a Moiser, as they said in Yiddish. Rabbi Aviner was also depicted. That was one of the other rabbis. Rabbi Aviner, very important rabbi who's both modern Orthodox and Haredi at the same time. Very influential in the Hesder Yeshiva movement. There's some things that the film did not do that I think it should have done. I made a point of not seeing the film until I would be able to look at it fresh. I've been teaching films from time to time now, over and over, 4 or 5, maybe, it's probably about 8 years in which I've taught a film course about 4 or 5 times. And if I watch the film too often, or if I watch it like 3 weeks before and don't go back to watch it right before, sometimes that's okay, but sometimes that's a problem. I wonder whether or not the experience would have been different if we saw Yigal Amir as what I'll call a normal kid. And we saw him before he became transfixed by Baruch Goldstein, by Barry Goldstein, as he was known in Einstein
Very
Medical
ghostly.
College.
Yeah.
We saw him, in the Hesder Yeshiva. We saw him in Russia, where he was, in fact, on Shlichut. He did some Bnei Akiva type of work. We saw him at the Hesder Yeshiva. I think he was in Kerem B'Yavne, in one of the classic kibbutzim where they have a yeshiva. And we saw some of his ties with his buddies who did favors for him, that the filmmaker never tried to justify. The filmmaker never told us why it was that his buddy was able to steal material.
Yeah.
So I don't have the answer, and the film doesn't give us an answer. The film just accepts it as for what it is.
Do you think that the tomorrow's statements that they're going to make, are they going to say they don't want a two-state presentation? Because I've been hearing that a lot from Israelis. No, don't divide the land.
So you asked me a very important question, and the best I can say is this. The decision as to what will be said tomorrow, or if anything will be said tomorrow about extending Israeli sovereignty or Israeli civil administration over parts of the West Bank, will reflect Israeli politics. Netanyahu and Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Gantz will have whatever disagreements there are. The reality is that Netanyahu will probably make the final decision as to what he will do. I don't think the Trump administration will take any leadership in terms of taking one opinion or another and trying to shove it down Netanyahu's throat. What they've said in public is that this decision is up to the Israelis. The Trump administration could say, and if Mr. Trump was as strong a leader as he would like us to think he is, he might in fact say, and not put it in his ambassador's mouth or in his son-in-law's mouth or in somebody else's mouth. He would say, this is a great plan. In order to do it, you must both annex and make a credible opening to the Palestinians that they can accept to negotiate for an independent sovereign state according to the plan. Netanyahu has actually said that he would welcome negotiations with the Palestinians, and the Trump administration, I don't think, is going to go any further than what Netanyahu said, and I don't think the Palestinians will find Netanyahu's offer to be very compelling. When I say Palestinians, I'm not talking about all Arabs who consider themselves to be Palestinian Arabs. I'm talking about the leadership of the PA, the Palestinian Authority. I just don't see that they are in a position to accept it, and I don't think they want to. So I don't know what's going to happen. Netanyahu will probably make up some reason to postpone it while saying it's part of his plan, but I don't know. What I do know, Donna, is I said that I don't think that we should look at a two-state solution as being the essential goal. And again, I think that saying, well, the end result is that having a Palestinian state, Arab state, and Israeli state, I don't think that that will solve the problems. What those states are might solve the problems. What kinds of rights Arabs have in Israel and Arabs have in the PA or in a Palestine, what kind of roles Israelis have, those are important things. In terms of extending Israeli sovereignty, I don't think it's going to make an awful lot of difference to people on the ground in terms of the nuts and bolts. I read one guy who said, I live in Ma'ale Adumim, and he didn't say, as I can tell you, because I've been in the police station in Ma'ale Adumim, the police are part of the Israeli police already. But if you want to build in Ma'ale Adumim, it's not the civil administration of the municipality, but apparently the army has to sign off on it also. But, you know, it won't make that much of a difference for Israelis and probably not for Arabs.
Mm.
I don't think Netanyahu's plan is going to extend Israeli citizenship or even Israeli residency to the Arabs who are going to be in that area that's annexed, to the extent that there are. And I also don't think Netanyahu's plan is going to be careful enough to make sure that the line is drawn so that no Arab residents are included in the areas that are annexed. I mean, I think there will be Arab residents.
This
That's
doesn't.
as much as I can predict.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't interrupt. Go ahead and finish. I didn't interrupt
That's
you.
it. I'm done.
Okay. Okay. Well, I just was wondering, what about the area of Negev? Is that not included, or is that?
Negev is not in this. Negev is not in dispute in any of the plans. I don't know that I want to talk politics as opposed to film, so
Thank you.
I'm gonna say one more thing about it, and then we'll go on to Vicky and Claudia, at least, who have stuff to say. The Israeli side often says that the area that's going to be annexed is the stuff that would be part of Israel in any conceivable peace plan. Negev is also part of that also. The only thing that's being discussed is having modifications of the border that would give some Arab residents of the Negev, put them in the West Bank or in the assign them to Gaza, but not more than that. Okay, Vicky, I saw you were about to say something. Were you about to say something?
Yes, yes. It's a question more than something to say. I had a question about how would the world be different in Israel, especially if Rabin had not been assassinated?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Good question.
Claudia, what do you think? I saw you were about to ask a question too, or at least add something.
Well, I was going to theorize on why the film was made.
Right.
And I'm thinking that it was to show the tribalism in Israel and how fruitless it might be how fruitless anyone who says, and you mentioned it, is it a biblical place, or did we inherit it, or is it the place, or I forgot what you said, the two things about the land or the
land versus the state.
Yeah.
That's in fact something historical. The disciples, as it were, the Gush Emunim, some of them believed that the land of Israel and the state of Israel should be exactly the same. Some of them gave priority to the land and some priority to the state. The state, giving priority to the state ultimately means that the prime minister is the symbol of the state. Giving priority to the land is that the land is the end all and be all. One could argue that Yigal Amir represented priority of the land.
Yeah. Yes, and the literal reading of the Bible.
Could be.
Could be.
Biblical texts make it real clear that the land of Israel, for example, in Numbers, I think Numbers, it might be in Deuteronomy, Moses is told that you will not conquer all the land at once.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Joshua tells us that the entire land was conquered, and there's in chapter 31 with a list of all the kings that were conquered, but Judges makes it clear that the whole land was not exactly conquered all at once. King David has a big swatch between Judah and Benjamin that he conquers. So, this is a period of 400 years. So, yes, in fact, the entire land of Israel was promised in a number of places to Abraham and his descendants. But the Bible also tells us that this did not happen in one fell swoop. Again, you can read it any way you want.
Yeah.
And I'm just arguing that it's not necessarily biblical fact. Vicky's question, what do you guys think? Had Amir been stopped, had Margalit Harshefi in fact turned him in, or had the rabbis said, this is what halacha says, but don't you dare commit murder, you stupid whatever. How might things have been different?
I would like to throw my 2 bits in and say I don't know that things would have changed all that much, because We had the first and second intifada that continued. I don't think that was because there was no peace plan. I've seen over the period of time since Israel was formed in 48 officially, right, that we've had nothing but land give-ups and fights and wars and fights and wars. And we gave up Gaza in 2005. It just continues to continue. And I would be so bold as to say, yeah, I don't think it would make it any difference whatsoever.
You don't think
We've got Arafat is no longer amongst us, right? And we still have problems. So I don't think that it would have changed much.
Yeah, Beth is right. I agree. Beth added to the chat. You heard Shir Shalom in the background. But we have tapes of Shir Shalom. And in fact, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have that as our end at 9:30. I'll find the Shir Shalom Peace Rally 1995. I know it's on YouTube. Okay.
And I guess I'm just going to interject here. I just was curious because Rabin's message was nonviolence and peace. And so I just wondered if he had been allowed to live out that philosophy and perpetuate his value, whether or not it would have been different.
So here is, you asked me what I thought. First of all, I think Lori is right in very important ways, although I would say with less surety than she did. From the point of view of authors, there was this counter-historical novel that came out in which some of you may have read it, and you'll tell me if you know about it. Lucky Lindbergh wins the presidency of the United States.
Yeah.
Did you read it?
Well, it wasn't called that, but it was similar. I don't remember what it was called, but that wasn't the one that I read, but it was about Lindbergh.
So Lindbergh, the anti-Semite, becomes president of the United States. And Philip Roth, at the end of the novel, basically has history returned to how it actually happened. Because very often in our counter-historical motifs, we come back to almost the inevitability of actual history, like time travel. You go back in time travel, you change things, but in the end, it really worked out the same way that it did before, even though parts of the story were different. On the other
Plot
hand,
against America, yeah.
Yeah. On the other hand, I think Vicki is right that Rabin might have been able to make the goals of the Oslo process work, and might because he was both a man of peace and he also was a man who broke bones. He was, I think, Beth, I don't remember the answers to the questions you asked me about Golda Meir and so on. But I do remember that you saw my quote in that lecture. The people who did the video lecture that I did for the veterans about Rabin being quite happy to break bones when people were making trouble. And my guess is that he would both have had the strong arm towards peace and the strong arm against the terrorists at the same time. And Peres really never had the popular support, nor that strength. He didn't have the military background, and I just don't think. I think that there was a possibility that Rabin could have pulled it off, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, didn't seem like we had that way.
I had a question, and that was in the lecture that you did for the veterans. You had a slide, and in the slide it said that any government of Israel will be unlikely to take unilateral action to withdraw. More likely, Israeli governments will call for unilateral annexation. Did you come up with that on your own, or did you read it?
This is at the very end.
It's in slide 6, disengagements.
Okay. All of the stuff on that in that lecture were my own ideas.
Okay.
They were informed by, you know, Wikipedia and online stuff and reading and my recollections and all sorts of other things. I actually did not play the entire lecture to see how good I was. I've looked at the last couple of minutes where I made projections for what I thought would happen by November of 2020. There's actually a little history to it. I told the lady, you know, when she gave me the date, I looked it up in my calendar and said, oh, that's the art site of Rabin. It's been like a quarter of a century. So I tell my students, unlike some of them who are good engineering students, 1995 to 2019 is not a full quarter of a century. But we had the title 25 years after the Rabin assassination that came up.
Right, yeah.
Included some predictions of what I thought would happen in the near future. And I usually say this, I don't remember whether I said it to the veterans, in predicting the Middle East, you have like no downsides. If I get it right, people will think I'm a genius. If I get it wrong, well, you know, one more wrong prediction. And, you know, nothing unusual about that. Okay. Okay.
Dr. Ward?
I'm going to share this. What about the Sephardic versus Ashkenazic? I specifically asked Donna the question before about Nava because the filmmaker both gives us to think that this was Ashkenazim versus Sfaradim. The mother of the mother character of Yigal Amir clearly talks about anti-Yemenite persecution. The
Yeah.
father seems to be very Yemenite, not very Israeli the way the mother is, but also much more level-headed. The actor comes from the same neighborhood. And I saw an interview or a review where he says he went to the same synagogue that Yigal Amir had gone to in the same neighborhood in Herzliya.
Yeah, I read that.
And I do think that part of what the filmmaker had in mind had to do with the ethnic issues. You know, they say, but they don't really justify in the dialogue. No, I'll take that back. They say that Nava split up because the family didn't want to have a Schwarzer, if you pardon the expression, in the family.
Family, exactly. Exactly.
The filmmaker makes it quite clear that Nava is really not prepared to put the laser beam target of Yigal Amir on some of the political goals ahead of herself, basically. You know, she was going to be whole hog maybe for a family and for a husband and a wife, but not necessarily for politics being bigger than everything. And again, I think the filmmaker at least allows us to speculate that that was the case, but that's how I saw it.
Me
I
too.
saw her
I
as
did,
Dr. Ward?
I did too.
Norma.
Yes, Dr. Ward, along those lines, there was a comment made that Amir had, when he went to the home of, is it Nava?
Nava.
Thank you, Nava. When he
Nava.
went to her home, and there was a friend that he had served with in the IDF, and he was bragging about how you know, Amir had murdered so many Arabs, and he
Right.
did it with such a with no remorse and almost you know, just a coldness. And he was so the practice of killing, and the practice of killing Arabs, and another race, you know, it was just a race thing, a lot of different race things going on.
Possible.
I think it was pretty apparent when when he called, he said to Nabal, I'm going to call you, right? And he calls and he gets the mother. And she says,
Yeah.
oh, she's not here right now. And I think that, you know, to me, that was put in, that everything specifically put in is called, she didn't approve of this and the daughter's not available.
Exactly. I think so. That's exactly it. Exactly.
You know, the film Casablanca, that's the main theme of the film, the Sephardic Ashkenazi split.
It could be, although remember, if you watch the film, that Casablanca's, it is Ashkenazi versus Sephardim, but the neighborhood is a polyglot. It's a pan-ethnic neighborhood, which is very important. Beth, I don't know if you all can see the chat. Socioeconomic differences are also important here. The family that lived in Psagot was clearly wealthy. The family that lived in Herzliya, although parts of Herzliya are very, very expensive, but this family was, I'll say, lower middle class. And she also quotes Golda Meir, who is in fact quoted for saying, we don't hate the Arabs for killing our sons, but we hate them for making us kill their sons. And she also would say things like, when the Arabs love their children as much as us, that's when we can make peace with them. That's not exactly the way she put it. Okay.
Interesting.
Very quiet. Do you have anything to add?
Just an interesting thing from the fallout of the movie, or the whole, you know, actually historical events. I haven't finished the movie yet, but when I was in Israel on Teglit, they took us there by the memorial, and it was interesting to hear how the prime ministers have more, per se, protection on them now due to the limit of no parole or shortening of prison sentences for people that murder a prime minister.
Yeah, well,
I did think that was an interesting thing that, you know, as I'm watching this, I'm going, okay, I'm starting to see how this is all.
Yeah, at the very end of the film, you'll see the filmmaker builds that into the story, that Amir was able to compromise security much too easily. And that would not happen after the assassination of Rabin.
Right. Actually, indeed, he spent 15 years in solitary, right? She got off, Marguerite got off
6 months
sentence, right? So she was off easy, but he's like, I mean, 25 years later, he's still locked away.
Yeah, well, he's in jail for life.
Yeah.
Plus a couple of years.
Plus 7 or 12, exactly.
Yeah, and he actually was able to get married to somebody else, and they had a conjugal visit, so he has a kid, but he's not getting out at all. And I don't think anybody's ever going to pardon him. Beth said, increased protection for prime ministers due to what? Due to the fact that there was an assassination attempt and the security was shoddy. They let somebody get in who should not have been. On the other hand, I mean, I have to say, you know, whether it is assassination or 9/11, you know, very dedicated extremists will very often find a way. And Amir had not one, but two, but three, according to the encyclopedia at least, three attempts within a year that he was able to. He was not caught, he was not stopped, and he was successful. Okay, let me see if I can find the tape that was requested. Okay, I have it here. Let me do the share screen. And I'm sorry that I do the share screen once I'm sure I have the thing. So here is. So this is from, you had a little bit of the tape in the background. And here is Rabin. Sing a song for peace. So what you saw there was just a little bit of the singer who sang at that time 14 years before, but you had a little piece of the documentary clip of Rabin singing as shown as part of the memorial. And if I had more time, and I should have done this as to prepare for this, to say, after all, I should make a public service announcement. These discussions are really not supported by anybody financially, but they are a continuation of my class, Middle East and Israel in Film. And Colorado Hebrew Chorale has decided to run a number of cultural programs during the summer. So I was happy to volunteer to do that. So that's the word from the sponsors. And I should thank the Laramie Jewish Community Center, who's always been very enthusiastic about all of my endeavors. So, you know, those are the things. I should mention that tomorrow and every Wednesday during July, I will be having the Wyoming Union Torah Studies, 5 to 5:30. We usually go to 6, talking. We will be having probably some comparison of Quran and Bible with the Red Heifer, and I want to talk about Miriam and Jephthah's daughter if I can. And then I'm doing an Inquisition Remembrance Service for a local group on July 19th, and I'm doing a Tisha B'Av service on July 30th at 6 p.m. in the afternoon. July 19th is at 10:30 in the morning, all by Zoom. So I'll try to make sure that everybody's in on this program will get the email invitation for it. The Inquisition is going to have a different number, different Zoom number with pre-registration. I don't know whether I'm going to keep that for the Tisha B'Av service. Zoom is changing how they're doing things in the fall and in July. And it'll be a little bit less easy to have totally open access, which is probably a good thing. Vicky and I think somebody else, Beth maybe, asked me about my courses in the fall. Email me and I'll send you the link to where I have the courses if anybody is interested. They'll all be on Zoom. You'll have at least access to the Zoom if you're interested, and I never mind having auditors in my class. Anybody else have anything final to say?
Oh, it's the program.
Next week is, I can't ever remember without the card.
Sandstorm.
Sandstorm, right. Next week is Sandstorm, the Bedouin. And this is a gender-related movie. It is one in which women have the main, well, willy-nilly women have the main roles. Okay. Beth, thank you very much for all of your chat participation. Carol, thank you very much also for chat participation. Josie, it's always great to have you participate. Jessica, welcome. I hope we'll see you more often. Now, are you in Boston these days or are you in Canada?
I'm on the East Coast here in Boston.
In Boston. Okay, very good. Okay, Art, thank you. Thanks to everybody. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.